Hello and welcome back to Life.EV, your weekly dive into essence of life's value explorations. That too, right in the heart of India's economic boom. I'm your host, Ajit Panicker. I'm sharing roles as the CEO of Nova and a founder of Pure Blue, where the entrepreneurial journey is a lived reality. Join us every Saturday at 11 a.m. for conversations that go beyond business growth, delving into the ethos of value creation. Let's embark on this quest together, redefining success in business and life. Welcome to Life.EV, Life Exploring Values. And as usual, I've got Vivek Asrani with me. Hi, Vivek.
Hi Ajit, how are you doing?
Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you for having me back.
So, to all our viewers, Vivek Asrani is from Kemo, a leader in industrial fasteners, and is known for his value explorations. Vivek has shared weekly insights on, and you can find all of them on vivekasrani.com for over 4 years, enriching our discussions with his profound reflections. Vivek also brings insights from his book, One Day at a Time, available on Amazon, which explores values in depth. Dive into this conversation with us of life.ev for a deeper understanding. So, today's episode, we're going to talk on learning to step aside. Learning to step aside. Vivek, what does that mean here?
So Ajit, let me start by reading out a few lines from the reflection. In fact, the opening lines, and it kind of sets the context for this discussion. We tend to offer our help and support with all the right intentions, and yet sometimes the results are contrary. We find ourselves trying harder to fix a relationship, but the more we try, the more stressed it gets. Sometimes the answer lies not in doing more, but actually doing less. Our ability to step back and step aside allows space to the other person, which can be the best thing for that relationship. You know, stepping aside, Ajit, really is making the relationship greater than our ego. In any relationship, we come into it with certain expectations of wanting certain things, and there are certain things we want to give. Now, very often, things in a relationship, in spite of there being two good people on either side of the relationship, are just not going well. Uh, there is tension, and that's when we realize that there sometimes is a need to allow the other person space. And just because we are well meaning, intentions are good, doesn't always mean that the other person is receiving it the way we are meaning it. And maybe what the other person needs is very different than what we are able to or are willing to offer. And in a situation like that, we need to keep our ego aside and make the relationship more important. That's one. The second is space, is extremely critical. And very often we forget, and we don't really understand what this means for the other person. Just because I love you and I care for you and I'm always willing to be there for you doesn't mean that I don't give you your space. And it doesn't mean that you always will receive me the way I want to be there for you. And the sensitivity uh, which we carry in terms of giving the other person their space is very important. And we very often we get hurt, and you would have hurt yourself. I mean, I've hurt myself saying this, that I was trying to do so much and I came with so much of, I was trying to help and I was doing so much, and yet look at the way the person responded to me. again, it was all about me, and I was doing so much. I forgot to think about the other person. So the second is the concept of space and realizing that space is important for the other person. And the third is what's the larger good. And this really typically works in a in a group context, that when it's not just two individuals, or even if it's two individuals, when the impact of that relationship is now beginning to tell on others and other situations, our willingness and ability to take a step back and say, look, for the larger good, it might be right for me to step aside. So making the relationship larger than the ego, recognizing and respecting space, and always thinking about the larger good. These are three things that help us make that sometimes very difficult decision to step aside, because you're typically stepping aside in situations with people whom you deeply care for.
So true. And you've had some personal experiences around this. Can you tell us some sharing around learning to step aside?
So Ajit, that's a tricky question because it, I mean, all whenever we've stepped aside in life, these are all very personal things, and I have to be very careful while answering that question because obviously I don't want to uh, put make it embarrassing for anybody, or mention anybody by name for sure. So there was a situation where I was part of a group. I had been part of it for 15 years. I had a particular role to play, and I think for almost 13 or 14 years it was a fantastic relationship with the person who had put the group together. Let's put it that way. And then for about a year, things had started getting a bit strained because I was playing my role on the group in a particular way. The person who was receiving it was feeling very stressed about it, didn't like the way it was being done, and this is coming on the back of a 14-year-old relationship, so it wasn't something new. And it reached a bit of a flashpoint, and it doesn't uh, happen so often in our lives when you're aware, but it just kind of it reached a point where I actually took a step back and I said, you know what, the right thing for me to do would be to really step aside. And I had a conversation with the person and I said, look, I think the time has come for me to probably give you your space to do things the way you believe it should be done. And I kind of gracefully stepped aside. I mean, there was no drama, there was no theatrics around it. In fact, we're still very much, well, not very much. Let me be honest. We are still in conversation, off and on. Uh, what's going on, what's happening, some ideas like a sounding board. That still happens. But you know, and to put it metaphorically, sometimes they say that very little grows under the shade of an oak. So also sometimes when you come into a situation being a little maybe overbearing, and I had a lot to learn in that experience as well. It's good to just step aside and do that. It wasn't easy for me. I don't know whether it has been easy for you, Ajit, if ever you've done something like this and had to step aside in your life sometimes.
Oh, I had a very interesting experience, and I'd love to share this. And
Hmm.
it's had a big positive impact. You know,
Hmm.
we have, the MSMEs in my industry, we never had a trade body.
Hmm.
And we had a trade body which was pretty much defunct. So
Hmm.
a few of us got together, just three or four of us, good friends, and we said, listen,
Hmm.
this is the
Hmm.
missing link in the value chain, and we need to build it. So it was a small body with just about less than 200 members, only based in Mumbai.
Hmm.
So I took over as a president. This was during COVID times. And one of the big reasons why a very old trade body had reached that level was because at any given point of time, it was driven around the person who led it. It was
Hmm.
never institutionalized, right? And but it was at its bottom, so it had you needed a person, you needed a handful of people who would take personal leadership and make it happen. Now, during my term, of course, not to take the full credit, we were at least about four or five of us who really made it. I had the opportunity. I just happened to be leading that team at that time, coincidentally.
Mm-hmm.
We did extremely well. From one city, we went to 15 cities and we became close to about 1,200 odd members. Right. So
Wow.
we really scaled up really, really well. Now, as my term got over, another person took over. But here was my problem. In that 2 years, 3 years almost 3 years of this growth, a lot of the things were evolving around me.
Hmm.
The
Hmm.
systems were there, the processes were there, and I was actually heading it and everything. Now, my
Hmm.
biggest fear at that time was, dude, we fell because we never institutionalized it. Are we making
Hmm.
that same mistake again?
Hmm. Hmm.
And
Hmm.
that's when it got handed over, I kind of very consciously started taking a full-on backseat. And trust
Hmm.
me, it's not easy because something that you've handled hands on and you've been at the thick and thin of the whole thing,
Hmm.
it's not easy. So I used to just hold by myself. I used to see some things that you had built was falling apart, crumbling, but you say, okay, look at the larger picture. And I'm so glad I did it, because what happened in the whole picture is a lot of new talent started coming up. The new person who took over realized that it was all about consolidation. It was
Yeah.
great. He had a different style of managing the whole thing. The trade body actually grew again further under him, and it's now truly institutionalized. So
Hmm.
sometimes, stepping aside is
Hmm.
also a great thing because it lets new talent come in and it institutionalizes the whole process and it goes beyond a certain person. So today, if you look at that trade body today, we've got so much of budding talent, different ideas, and you just have to learn to give it up. Think beyond yourself, and just say that, okay, what is the larger picture? Why did I come in here at the first place? What was it that I was trying to create, and what is it that I wanted to be part of? So for me, that stepping aside was a very critical moment in achieving the larger goal. you
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
but you know but Vivek, you said one thing in your book which I wanted to, you have to learn to step aside with a lot of grace and
Hmm.
humility. It's more easier said than done, especially as entrepreneurs where we are hands on and we tend to build on a lot of things. And I'm saying this also because each of us have to go through the process of giving our businesses to the next generation too. So how does that work here? I mean, it's more easier said than done.
Yeah. So let me take that in two parts. You spoke about being an entrepreneur. So, as an entrepreneur, you're a business leader. There is an expectation and a responsibility that you will lead your team and your organization. So, there you have to be very mindful when you're stepping aside because it's not so much about the emotions, it's about nurturing people, grooming people, but at the same time, being very much in charge, uh, hands on if necessary, to uh, do whatever it takes, to grow the business, make it sustainable, and especially in a rapidly changing world around us. So there's sometimes, when to step aside and when not to. And as an entrepreneur, we know that the risk is ours, the buck stops with us. So it's always a little more difficult in that sense, right? The second aspect of this, and I said I'll take this in two parts. So the second part is the personal relationships, and I think that's where the struggle really is. See, if we have to step aside from somebody who is not so close to us, it's not very difficult. If we step aside from being part of a group which we're really not attached to and we're just a kind of a member on the outside, it's no big deal. That's not really stepping aside. Stepping aside is really a challenge when we have to step aside with relationships that are closest to us, spouse, children, people who work closely with us, close friends, or situations in the family or extended family, where the right thing is for you to step aside. Yes, it does sometimes cause a lot of hurt, a lot of anger, because we view it that I was doing so much. And I think if you ask me, my learning, Ajit, has been that we need to rephrase the conversation with ourselves to say it's not about what I wanted to give, it's what the other person needed. I mean, imagine you go to a doctor needing a particular kind of medication and the doctor gave you a prescription which was not suitable for you and you decided not to take it. Now, the doctor has no business taking offense to say, I did so much, I gave a prescription and I gave the medication. The person says, but that's not what I really needed. I came for something else. You gave me what you wanted, not what I needed. And I think this difference of what you need and what I'm giving is very important for us to recognize. So in that sense, yes, there is a lot of hurt and anger when we often have to step aside because of our attachments, because of our love. But to answer your question, if we learn how to do it with care and we put the best interest of the other person at the center of our decision and say, stepping aside is not about me stepping aside, it's about giving the other person the right environment for their growth. And that's my love to them. That I will love them as much from a distance as I did with proximity. Then it's not about us, then it's about the relationship.
That's amazing. Yeah. That's amazing. And I hope many of us actually really understand the depth of what you just said right now. Sometimes you're stepping aside because you care. As simple as that. And you do it with a larger interest, you do it with a larger purpose, and that's a big value that you can generate for yourself, right? You're not in the limelight, but you do it just because you care. Yeah, and that's fantastic.
Yeah. And also, Ajit, we have to keep reminding ourselves that stepping aside is not walking away from a relationship. It's learning to give as much love and care from a distance as well.
How interesting is that? Well, that's about the time we've had for today's topic. And that was an interesting discussion. It's got me thinking also while just talking about it. Well, that's what we want you to do. Don't keep these ideas to yourself. Share this episode with your friends, colleagues, and family, and ask a questions. What are your thoughts on this? Spark a conversation and see where it leads. So that brings us to the end of our episode, which was full of insights on balancing value and business growth. And remember, we are eager to hear from you. Engage with us on our social media, share your questions, and tell us what you've learned. Your input is crucial in fostering an ethically driven business community. That's all for today. Join us next week on Life.EV for more on exploring values. Vivek, thank you very much as usual for today's insights. And to all our viewers, tune in next week for deeper discussions that guide our ethical compass. Thanks for listening and keep the conversation of values going with your friends. Thank you, Vivek. Pleasure to have you always.
Thanks, Ajit. Take care.
Bye bye. See you guys.